So do we have the picture?
Oh, yeah.
Not the pot thing, but the picture of the woman. Okay, there she is. Did any of you see this picture?
Yes.
Turn the light up for just 1 second so you can just kind of see how ash covered she is. She's an African American woman, and I just wanted you to have a good picture of what she looked like on 9/11. Okay, we can turn the light back on. Her name is Marcy Borders, and she's finally, just in May, she says, shaken off the demons from 9/11. She's battled severe depression, crack cocaine addiction. Her 2 children were taken away from her since this day when this photograph was snapped to her of her as she had just been fleeing from the World Trade Center. She had just been at her new job for 1 month when, of course, we know what happened that day. And she panicked when the building next to her was hit, and she did what her boss told her not to do, which was to leave. She ran down the stairs and ran out into the street. And she says that she was paralyzed by what she saw. There were wounded and injured people everywhere. The North Tower collapsed. She says, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The world went silent. And a stranger pulled her into the lobby of a building, and someone took that picture. And she said, afterwards, it was like my soul was knocked down with those towers. Her life completely went out of control. And she began to panic. She would have panic attacks every time she saw an airplane. Every time she would see anybody on top of a building, she thought that they were going to shoot her. And she said that her life just went completely to pieces. And only in April of this year did she finally turn herself in to a rehabilitation center for her addiction. 8 days later, she says Osama bin Laden was dead. And a month later, she left the rehab center and said that she believes her life is solidly, on good ground now. She's back with the father of one of her children. She got her 18-year-old daughter and her 30-year-old son back, and she said, and they have their mom back finally. So I want to know, were any of you in New York on September 11th, 2001? Not New York City, but in the city. Did any of you have family members or friends who were in the city, in Manhattan that day? A lot of people did. Did any of you lose your friends or loved ones that day? No. I know all of us can remember where we were, what we were doing. I remember I was sleeping, and Mike called me on the phone and said, you have to turn the TV on. And of course, I couldn't believe my eyes. So last weekend, we went to see this really wonderful woman who belongs to a Christian peacemaking team. And she writes, I visited one of the poorest neighborhoods in Basra, Iraq, with slum-like conditions, torn up streets piled with trash and rubble and pools of sewage. The homes were modest and in disrepair, but full of loving and welcoming people. Peggy was her name. Kathy, a team member of hers, had lived with some of these people in these same houses 2 years earlier for a couple months. And as soon as they pulled up, she said all these children came running out and yelling, Kathy, Kathy. And she said one of the mothers living in those homes told this story. She said a U.S. plane flew over Basra, bombing her neighborhood. She found her 2 sons, her 6-year-old Haider and 4-year-old Mustafa in pools of blood and covered with rubble. Haider was dead. Mustafa was alive. She carried him to the hospital. He had been hit on the head, the legs, the back. On one of his hands, he lost 2 fingers and part of his liver, and had a piece of shrapnel lodged near his spine. He obviously needed more surgery than she could get for him in Iraq at the time because of the sanctions that the United States and other countries had placed on them. But later on, he did finally get out of his country and get to the U.S. and get the surgery he needed. She said they visited another home with a mother of 9 children who said, every time planes fly over, my children cry out in fear. Peggy said, I was really impressed with these amazing women and how courageous they were, but it was obvious that this possibility of war, because this is before we had even waged war officially on Iraq, really made everyone visibly afraid. And this woman went on to say, where could we run or hide, and how can I protect my children? These 2 stories of mothers and children, though in different countries, about a year apart, are clearly connected. They both involve the United States. They both involve airplanes. They both involve extreme violence. And they both involve human beings who are suffering at the hands of strangers. They both involve broken hearts. And no one in either story will ever completely heal from the wounds that were inflicted on them. And although both stories end brighter than they could have ended, neither story needed to happen. We live in a world where we use violence to control, gain revenge, and simply terrorize. What happened on September 11th didn't just change New York City. It didn't just change the United States. It changed our entire world. 19 men with a single disastrous idea managed to take the lives of over 3,000 people on one sunny September day. The financial cost of that one day was over $2 trillion. The cost of war and security and financial loss since that day is estimated somewhere between $5 and $9 trillion. The related death toll has climbed to nearly 1 million men, women, and children. And at least twice that many have been wounded. Violence is expensive, no matter how you look at it, and no one wins. Just on that day in New York, 1,300 orphans were created. 17 pregnant women lost their husbands. 1 year later, 20% of those within 1 mile radius of the Twin Towers suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, an increase of 200%. This is all 1 year later, a total of 400,000 New Yorkers suffer from post-traumatic stress, and 10,000 of them are school-age children. There was a 25% increase in alcohol use in Manhattan. And now, maybe I have some good news. There was a 30% increase in sex toys that were sold at a New York store. And a 20% increase in people that went to church. 26 days later, we began bombing Afghanistan, dropping in the first 6 months 22,000 bombs, 25% of them missing their targets, 10% of them not exploding and leaving landmines behind. And this was just in the first 6 months. And no matter what good that did, in the sense that maybe we really began to send the message to these terrorists that this was not the behavior we were going to put up with in this country, still the truth is, in this kind of violence, nobody really wins. Today, there are millions of Americans, not only Americans, but people all around the world joining and remembering September 11th. And I spent probably a good deal of the last 3 days with the TV on in the background as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, and listening to the amazing stories of heroes and heartache, and how people's lives have changed, and how so many good things have come from the people that have experienced such great sadness. But I want to give attention today to the people that were just the collateral damage. All of the people in Afghanistan and Iraq, U.S. military, don't even talk about the U.S. military. We talk about what happened that day in that town. But the U.S. military and the military of people from all over the world who have all died as a result of 9/11. We focus so much attention on just that spot and that day and what happened, and so little attention on this whole event of 10 years. And the saddest part is the people that were the collateral damage, that hasn't ended. There will be more of them today, and more of them tomorrow, and more of them the next day. Those 19 men, they didn't personally know Marcy Borders when they flew those planes into the World Trade Center. And they forever altered her life and her family's life. And the American pilots in the military didn't know Mustafa or Haider that day that they dropped the bomb. And they yet altered forever their lives and their families' lives. Unfortunately, what they did know is loyalty to an ideology, loyalty to a theology, loyalty to a belief or an idea is something as fluid as an idea. That is what they devoted themselves to. What they flew their plane on were the wings of an idea. Beliefs do the killing and wounding. Not the people, but the beliefs. I invite us today to think about looking at this differently. The beliefs of people do the damage, and not the people themselves. Our job is to figure out how we become and stay people whose beliefs and ideology and theology are not the kind people want to run from, are not the kind that people need to be afraid of, are not the kind that continue to manifest in the world, however subtle, more violence. I mean, we need to remember, some people have access to planes and weapons, but that is not where the most damage is done. Because all of those people, I read an article about kids in Afghanistan who have no idea that the military is there because of 9/11. They have no idea that we're there to fight terrorists. They have no idea. In fact, some of them said it's very selfish of us to go home because they think life is better since we've been there. But their teacher, the principal who runs their school, says, I don't like the Americans. I would like them out because I think the Taliban is just as good. So I want us to remember that the kinds of beliefs and ideology that people get taught from the time they're children are what do the damage, not the people themselves. It's just how do we become people who see something different and do something different that impacts that ideology that teaches fear and hate? And all of us, no matter how we feel about 9/11, I would guess still somewhere in us have some sort of unhappiness about it. I remember that I remember flying on a plane about 4 days later, and there was probably 10 of us on this big, giant 747, and it was the only time I could sit wherever I wanted, lay out where I wanted to. But a few months after that, I packed my bags to move to Florida, and I remember packing was really tough because I was taking everything I was going to need for the next 3 months in 2 suitcases, and I was starting a new job, and I had things that I wanted to have with me. And so I packed my bags, everything perfectly. There was breakables in there. There were pictures and posters in there that if they got bent, they would get ruined. And I happened to be the person that they picked out to search their bags. That was before they went through that little machine. That was when they actually stood there and went through your stuff. And I remember just about crying because I kept thinking, I could stand there with them, but I'm it took me hours to pack this. And if they unpack all this, I kept thinking, I don't even know if I'll make my plane, and all this stuff started going through my head. And at that particular time, none of us were used to being sort of, inspected, violated, whatever it was, in that particular way. And I think now about how they're going to have us stand in front of these machines. Anybody stood in front of those machines yet where they see you naked, basically? And I think that we have come a long way. From them opening our bags and running a little thing in there to make sure that we don't have bombs, to standing there. So I want to talk to us today about forgiveness, because it is something that of all of the people I watched on TV, and I am sure that most of them have done forgiveness work, forgiveness was never mentioned in the probably 25 hours that I watched television. And all of these people talking about how we had changed, and all of these people talking about about these stories. No one said anything about national forgiveness. No one said anything about collective forgiveness. No one said anything about forgiveness. They just simply talked about the event over and over. What was wrong? What had happened wrong? What was wrong? And I thought, have we considered as a collective, have we considered the idea of forgiveness? I don't know, because I didn't hear anybody talk about it. But it was one of the things that I believe that we need to talk about when it comes to these kinds of world events, is this idea of forgiveness. And a lot of people believe that, and so I don't care how forgiveness works for you. If you believe that you ask Jesus to help you, or if you meditate, or if you ask your higher power, however that goes, I'm just asking you to do it. To actually do it around this event, around this particular, or any particular feelings you still have. Or when you see those people on TV, I don't know, maybe some people felt this way too. I was very disturbed about killing Osama bin Laden. And I was disturbed about it because I thought, why does that make it right? Why do we get to just go in his house and shoot him? Take him to jail, take him to trial. I don't know. And the whole people celebrating, I think that attitude breeds more. And I want us to find a place to be the kind of people that no matter what's happening in our world, we're breeding less. Less of that and more love. So I think we're called to forgiveness for a lot of reasons, because it breaks down walls between sexes and races and nations and classes and neighbors and strangers and family and friends. A Uruguayan priest, Perez Afuri, says, "Only the one who hopes that his or her act will open a new history of loving relationships can truly forgive the one who has shown hatred." Imagine, like Becky said in the meditation if you were here, this is a moment in evolutionary time when we have an opportunity to take a giant leap in consciousness because of this event. When we have an opportunity to say, when an event is this painful, that we choose to forgive and to move on in some different way than to do something that we would have done in some past event, a past way that we've lived in our lives. It says we must forgive so that we can reach across the divide that separates us. And the bridge is already there. The bridge is love, and it's already there. And we're going to have to cross that bridge over again and over again and over again, and bring with us more people. And bring with us more events into that place of love, rather than letting anything separate us that happens in our world. And for the sake of the enemy, or the people, the labels of the enemy, and for our sake of understanding what that means. Because sometimes when I talk about forgiveness, I say it's all about you. Well, it is all about you, but it's all about you letting go of the person, the burden you've placed on the person. Because when you set that person free, you set yourself free. And so we need to, and there's this idea of when you talk about national forgiveness, also, and I'm not talking about sentimental forgiveness. I'm not saying that we let killers go. I'm saying that we just release them. from the burden of our need to get even. Because there is no even. There's just no such thing as getting even. And forgiveness is not forgetting. It's kind of this tricky thing. What we forget is the reason that they made us a victim. What we forget is how we use that as an excuse. But if we forget, there is the possibility that we will repeat what we've done. If we forget, there is the possibility that we forget the pain we've experienced, which makes it easier to do something like that. So do we forget these events? Absolutely not. But we forgive them so that we can move on and we release people. So we have this collective consciousness in this country, and we have it in every country. Every country has it, and it's called society or your culture, and it is your collective consciousness. And Walter Wink says, each individual must assess before God his or her degree of moral guilt or complicity, accommodation, or passivity. All human beings in solidarity share metaphysical guilt for every wrong and injustice in the world, especially those which might have been prevented by our acts. Moral and metaphysical guilt are not the domain of the state, but the jurisdiction of God alone. We need this forgiveness stuff. We need it for ourselves. We need it for our part in all of the times we don't do anything about an injustice that we could do. I saw a man yesterday who, there was something very important, some piece of legislature or something, and it might have been about the victims, the people who worked in 9/11 not getting health care. And he said that he asked all of his friends, he said, there's this bill that might get passed, and people said, well, what can we do? And he said, you can call your legislature, you can call your representative, and he said that not one of them did. And how that was so much that what he found, with all the people who rush out with what can I do, they don't really necessarily mean that they're going to. What they mean is, it's a really great way to say, I feel bad about what's happened to you, but in truth, the going home and the doing may not happen. And forgiveness is not reconciliation. And so, when you've gotten into some, negative event with somebody, and what you really want is for them and you to tell the truth. If they've really done something to you, you want them to say, I did it and I'm sorry. And so that peace sort of helps bring that forgiveness and that relationship back into sync with. So how do we create, and this is another thing that I hear people say, well, how would we create reconciliation with those 19 dead people? We know how to do that. We sit in meditation. We bring them to us. We talk to them. We do that with people that we love. Why don't we do it with people that we can't forgive? Why don't we do it with people that we have deemed our enemy? That same psychic or cosmic reconciliation can occur in that exact activity of just bringing those people to you, sitting them in a chair in front of you in meditation, and saying, we got to talk about this because I can't get over it, and I need to hear something from you. I know it sounds like, maybe to some people, sort of too easy, but it isn't too easy. It's true. That energy shows up. You call it, it comes. And if it doesn't come, in that willingness of yours to do that reconciliation work, something in you will shift anyway. I invite us, there are other things we can do. Forgiveness is a very big piece. And I invite us to do some research to discover what might have made those young Arab Muslim men and other young Arab Muslim men following in their footsteps willing to do what they did. Because if we have no idea, it's like getting in a fight with somebody you love and you never ask them what's wrong. You just keep trying to make up for it, but you have no idea what's wrong. Or you keep trying to pretend it's not happening, but you never give them the chance to tell you why. You never have any idea what's wrong. Why don't we care what's wrong? How many of you have done research to figure out why they might have done something like that?
They didn't do it.
Well, we're not going there. We're not going there. Because they are doing stuff around the world in other places and other events are happening. So it doesn't matter because this energy that's happening, this creation of this conflict and violence between them and us at this particular time, so between some ideologies and some theologies, is going to keep happening for a while until we become interested enough in why is that person suffering? Why is that person suffering? Geez, what is it? What do I do differently to alleviate that suffering? Instead of listening to what we hear on television or listening to some other person's theology thinking that it's going to fix their suffering. If this is a relationship thing, every person on this planet, if we are one, it's all about the relationship. Any relationship can break through an ideology or a theology or a belief. If we work at that relationship, this is another way we become the people who don't continue to perpetuate the things that have been happening in our world that create so much violence. We begin to get involved in relationships. Are there people that make you afraid? Make you nervous when you're around them? So go figure out how to be around them. Go figure out how you know, when I started working for Yellow Umbrella, I went into a lot of people's houses that I would not have just voluntarily gone and knocked on the door. Some people who have done some very scary crimes, some people who, I don't know if how much they're on drugs and all that kind of stuff, but what I realized was once I got inside that door, there's people, just like me. They have different experiences. They do have different ideas and theologies and beliefs. But as soon as I cared about them, that was it. All that broke down. None of that made any difference anymore. There was no thing between us. So I say, if you're scared of somebody, go figure out how to be around that kind of person more often. So last week, we went to Peace Camp, some of us, and we spent the weekend with Peggy Gish, who is an incredibly brave 60-year-old woman who has been all over the world in war zones trying to create peace. In fact, I decided that I didn't know anybody that was as brave as she is, probably except maybe Dee. She travels with a group called the Christian Peacemaking Team, and they have a motto, and their motto is that they must be as dedicated to their mission as the military is to theirs. Now, I think they both think they're on the same mission, and I think that they would both believe in the same end. One group believes you get there one way, one group believes you get there another way. She writes this in her book. She says, I'm a 60-year-old woman who grew up in a family that thought killing was wrong. And to think that a small group of us could make a difference in Iraq against the determination of the most powerful military force on earth and an administration that has no qualms about waging war. I don't know what I'm doing here. She goes on, one of the tasks I feel that are given to us as Americans in Iraq and as people of faith is to speak the truth, to expose the lies that are being told. We are called to help the Iraqi voice be heard, to make the Iraqi people visible, to help Americans simply see them. They are here. They are the ones who are suffering from the power plays of governments. Our task is to point out and live out truth, to love and thereby transform the enemy into our brothers, our sisters, and our friends. If we can have a clean slate, make it a start over, a do-over. As we say sometimes, let's have a do-over. And let's have exactly what she said. Let's point out and live out the truth so that we can transform the enemy into our brother and our sister and our friend. There's a story about a teacher who was asked by his followers, how can we determine the hour of the dawn? Is it when the night ends and the day begins? Is it when, from a distance, you can tell the difference between a dog and a sheep? No, said the teacher. Well, then, is it when you can distinguish a fig tree from a grapevine? No, said the teacher. It is when you can look into the face of a human being and you have enough light to recognize them as your brother or your sister. Up until then, it is night, and the darkness is still with us. So, how dark is it? Because the hour of the dawn is entirely up to us. And I invite you to look at 911, at 9/11, exactly as Becky said this morning, an opportunity in the evolution of our consciousness to use forgiveness and to consciously become a person of peace and do our lives differently. And let's just usher in the dawn quickly.